The insult hit harder than any storm. Freeloaders, my father spat across the dinner table. Not strangers, not neighbors. Me and my 12-year-old son. Hi, I'm Colleen Harper, 36, product manager, mother, homeowner. The cruel irony? They hurled those words inside the very house I bought. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I looked them in the eyes. One sentence left the room frozen. From that moment, nothing was the same. A fracture too deep. A family line torn clean. They thought I'd bend. They thought I'd bankroll their mess. They thought wrong. Before I explain why I drew that line, I want to hear from you. What city are you watching from right now? Leave a comment so I know how far this story travels. And trust me, their cruelty was only the beginning. I was 18 when my world cracked open. My grandfather's will left me $100,000. It was my chance, college, a future, a life I dreamed. I held my acceptance letter, imagining classrooms and computer science labs. But that summer night, my parents called me into the living room. My father crossed his arms, eyes hard. "We need your inheritance," he said, voice flat, like weather. Confused, I asked, "Need it for what?" My mother turned, avoiding my gaze, then forced a smile. "Philip's starting a construction business with your father. He needs capital." She added, "It's a sure thing. We'll pay you back." Philip, the golden child, wasn't even present. He didn't need to be. They spoke for him. "What about my college?" I whispered, hands clutching the letter. "You can get loans, Colleen. This is for the family," my father said. My mother nodded quickly, as if that sealed my fate. Their family never meant me. It always meant Philip. Within a year, the company collapsed. Debts piling, dreams evaporating. No repayment, no apology, not even an acknowledgement. My future vanished in their gamble. I was left with nothing but resentment and a duffel bag. That night, I packed my laptop, $500, and walked away. No one stopped me. No one checked if I was safe. Outside, the summer air pressed heavy against my skin. Streetlights buzzed as I dragged my bag across cracked sidewalks. Every step echoed louder than the silence I left behind. Neighbors' houses glowed with laughter, but none of it was mine. I was 18, clutching hope and fear in equal measure. Alone, yet determined to carve a life they could never steal. They called it sacrifice, but the only sacrifice was me. The apartment smelled of dust and instant noodles. 2 strangers shared the rent, but I mostly shared silence. My mattress sat on the floor, thin sheets barely covering springs. Still, it was mine. Earned, not given. College was brutal. Classes drained me by day. Jobs consumed me by night. Waitressing, stocking shelves, tutoring, my body never rested. Some nights I collapsed, too tired even to eat. I lived on caffeine and determination. Ramen noodles stretched across weeks, textbooks heavier than groceries. Every bill felt like a test I wasn't allowed to fail. The acceptance letter stayed pinned above my desk, yellowing with time. Loneliness stalked every hallway. When lights flickered during storms, no one checked my door. When rent was due, no parent wired money to save me. The silence was deafening, but it became my teacher. My parents never asked how I survived. Their calls came twice a year, voices rehearsed and hollow. "How's school?" my mother asked, before praising Philip's next big idea. It was always Philip, never me. I stopped waiting for care that never came. Instead, I found resilience in the quiet hours. I studied while others slept, coding late into the night. Anger kept me awake. Pride kept me moving. By graduation, I was exhausted but undefeated. Top of my class, computer science degree in hand. When I walked across that stage, no family applauded. Only strangers clapped. But I clapped for myself inside. An entry-level job in tech changed everything. Steady paychecks replaced ramen with real meals. Bit by bit, I paid my loans. Bit by bit, I rebuilt my life. Then came marriage. A colleague, sharp, funny, dependable, or so I believed. For a while, I thought stability had finally found me. But betrayal found me first. Texts on his phone shattered the illusion. Cheating, months of it, hidden behind casual smiles. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I packed his bags and told him to leave. He stayed in Dylan's life, sending money, keeping distance. And I stayed standing harder than before. The first time I held Dylan, tiny and warm, I knew I would never let him feel my loneliness. Through every storm, I refused to bend. The seed of resentment toward my parents grew silently. Not wild, not forgotten, just waiting. Waiting for the day I would face them again. I had built my world in silence. But silence never lasts forever. The call came on a quiet Tuesday evening. Dylan's pencil scratched across homework while dinner cooled on the stove. My phone buzzed. My mother's name lit the screen. I hadn't spoken to her in months. Her voice shook, nothing like the sharpness I knew. "Colleen, it's your father. He's sick, really sick." She rushed the words, then added, "The bank's foreclosing. 300,000 owed." My chest tightened, but not from sympathy. 300,000. The same pattern. Bad ventures. Endless debts. Pleas for rescue. "What do you want me to do?" I asked flatly. "You're doing so well," she pressed. "We're family. Help us." That word, family, burned worse than fire. I hung up, pacing as guilt clawed at me. Part of me whispered, "Let them drown." But another voice, the child still wanting closure, hesitated. Denise cut through the noise. "They're using you. Don't let guilt own you." Still, I packed a bag, arranging for Dylan to stay. Not to save them, but to close unfinished chapters. Louisville greeted me with peeling paint and overgrown grass. The house looked smaller, weaker, like the people inside. Stepping across the threshold, memories collided with present decay. Cookie-scented afternoons became shadows of mildew and dust. My father lay frail in the living room, eyes stubborn still. My mother ushered me in, gratitude painted thin. The air smelled of old coffee and desperation. Over coffee, she leaned closer, desperation showing. "You could fix this. Cover at least 200,000. It's the least you can do for family." Her smile was brittle, her tone expectant. I set my cup down slowly, blood simmering. "That's a lot of money. I have Dylan. I have responsibilities." My father's eyes narrowed, voice sharp as ever. "You've always been selfish, Colleen. We gave you everything." Everything? They stole my inheritance, abandoned me at 18. Now I was selfish for refusing to bail them out? Philip arrived late, smirk glued to his face. "Don't play the victim, Colleen. Step up or watch us sink." I clenched my fists under the table. But then, my mother leaned in, words icy, deliberate. "You and your son are just freeloaders living off our sacrifices." The insult sliced deeper than any debt ever could. They didn't just come for me. They came for Dylan, my son, my reason, my world. And in that moment, I swore he'd never feel my pain. That night, betrayal wasn't just history. It was alive, staring at me. I stood. My chair scraped stone against the kitchen tile. My voice stayed low, steady, deliberate. "Do not use my son as leverage." My mother scoffed, lips curved like knives. My father stared, daring me to bend. Philip checked his phone, pretending boredom, enjoying power. "Family doesn't demand what I earned," I said. "Family doesn't insult my child to open my wallet." Silence throbbed harder than any shouted curse. I left before rage rewrote the night. Outside, the air felt like broken glass. I dialed Denise, hands shaking but controlled. "Good," she said. "Hold the line. Then we take back the board." The next morning, my phone exploded. Coworkers, friends, Dylan's coach, all texting. "Have you seen this?" My mother's video flooded TikTok. Tears, tissues, tremble on command. "Ungrateful daughter lets us lose everything." Comments called me heartless, selfish, cruel. I stared at the screen, heartbeat cold. They wanted a public fight. I chose a legal one. "Hit them where it hurts," Denise said. "The house, the leverage, buy it." I met Laura, a razor in a blazer. She laid the options out clean. The bank wants out, not drama. Buy directly, clear the lien, own everything. Numbers clicked, then locked into place. Savings, investments, a manageable loan. I signed with a steady hand. Deed in my name, not theirs. Next came the terms. Laura drafted the agreement like a scalpel. They could stay, 5 years, structured repayment, fair interest. Miss a payment, they vacate, no theatrics. Cease and desist to end the lies. We sent the packet certified and sharp. My mother called, voice shaking with fury. "You think you can control us? You'll regret this, Colleen." Her words struck deep, but memory struck deeper. I saw myself at 18, duffel bag in hand. Back then, leaving meant weakness. Now, standing meant power. What they called giving had always been taking. Philip texted one line. "You're ruthless." I watched the dots blink, then stop. No reply necessary. That night, Dylan built a Lego ship. He asked if storms were finished. "Not yet," I said, kneeling beside him. "But we have a map now." Laura updated me the next morning. "They refused to sign," she said. "They claim they owe you nothing." "Proceed," I answered, voice even. Eviction is slow, but truth is patient. I cataloged their messages, their threats, their smear. I chose preparation over panic, boundaries over begging. For once, I held every card clean. For the first time, the terms were mine, and mine alone. 30 days later, the house was empty. Boxes half packed, curtains ripped from rings. They left quietly, but not gently. I walked each room without nostalgia. Memories tried to bargain. I didn't answer. I hired cleaners, changed locks, opened windows. Sunlight cut through the stale air. A young couple signed the lease. Laughter returned to a place that once took mine. The rent flowed into Dylan's college fund. That felt like justice, not revenge. I blocked numbers I once waited for. I archived voicemails I used to replay. Silence finally sounded like peace. Boundaries finally felt like love. Before leaving Louisville, I drove past the house once more. The windows stared back, hollow, stripped of their power over me. I whispered a quiet goodbye. Not to them, but to the girl I used to be. The chapter was closed, and I would not reopen it. On Saturday, Dylan and I planted marigolds. He asked if storms were over. Storms come and go, I said, but we don't live under them. I showed him the deed with my name. I told him strength isn't shouting, it's choosing. Choosing when to stay and when to leave. Choosing respect over approval, every time. People talk about blood like it's a contract. But family is who shows up kindly. Who holds your line when you're tired. Who celebrates your no as much as your yes. If you've been where I've been, breathe. You are not heartless for choosing yourself. You are not cruel for locking the door. You are brave for turning the key. Have you ever faced something like this? Tell me in the comments below. If you've been through this, you're not alone. I'm listening, and so is this community. I choose my son, my peace, and the woman I became. Before saying goodbye, if this story touched your heart, please give it a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Don't forget to subscribe for more true family betrayal stories. That reminds us we are stronger than we think.
The church smelled faintly of lilies and candle wax, the kind of scent that clings to you long after you leave. I stood beside Aaron's casket, my hand resting lightly on the polished wood, numb to the stream of condolences from people whose names I barely remembered. Every hug, every "I'm so sorry," was another reminder that my husband of 11 years was gone, taken by a sudden aneurysm that gave us no warning and no chance to say goodbye. Boston's spring air was damp when I stepped outside after the service, my heels sinking slightly into the grass as the crowd drifted toward the reception hall. I moved through it all as though underwater shaking hands, accepting plates of food I wouldn't touch, nodding when people spoke but not really hearing. That night, when the last guest left and I was finally alone, I sat on the edge of our bed staring at the empty pillow beside me. I thought if I stayed still enough, maybe I could pretend Aaron was just running late. The calls from my mother began the next morning. At first, she checked on me in the way mothers do, asking if I was eating, if I'd slept at all. But by the third call, her tone shifted. She reminded me that Callista's baby celebration was coming up next week, that it had already been planned before Aaron's death. That family shows up for family. I told her I couldn't. I wasn't ready. The thought of being in a room full of chatter and cake and smiling faces felt almost cruel, but she kept going, softening her voice as if that would make the words land easier. Aaron always said family comes first. Marin, you know he'd want you there, somewhere between exhaustion and guilt. I agreed. We ended the call with her promising to save me a seat near the front. That evening, I stood in our quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, and realized I'd just committed myself to walking straight into a celebration I had no desire to attend. A week later, I pulled into the narrow driveway beside Callista's rental house, the spring wind rattling the loose siding. The place was small, with faded shutters and a yard littered with toys. I cut the engine and sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the wheel, willing myself to step out. The sound of laughter drifted from the backyard, high and bright, the kind that doesn't match the heaviness pressing in your chest. I smoothed my black skirt left over from the funeral and grabbed the wrapped gift from the passenger seat. Callista's friend opened the door before I knocked. I recognized her vaguely from past family gatherings, but couldn't recall her name. Oh, Marin. You made it, she said, her voice polite but strained, as if she'd been caught off guard. She stepped aside, and I walked in. The living room was strung with blue balloons and paper streamers, a banner declaring Happy Baby Jonah across one wall. But my eyes went first to the small knot of people in the kitchen. They were strangers, leaning close to each other, whispering. Their voices stopped abruptly when I passed by. In the backyard, my parents sat together at a picnic table, their posture unusually stiff. My father's jaw tightened when he saw me, though he stood to give me a brief hug. "We weren't sure you'd come," he said. "Of course I came," I murmured, setting the gift on a nearby table. As I looked around, I noticed the subtle changes in the air. Conversations dipped into silence when I drew near. People smiled too quickly, too politely, their eyes sliding away as if they'd been caught mid-thought. I told myself it was the widow effect, no one quite knowing what to say to the woman who had buried her husband just days earlier. Still, something about the way the backyard felt too careful, too staged, left me uneasy. I was standing by the drink table, pretending to be interested in a plastic cup of lemonade, when the back door opened and Callista stepped out, baby Jonah on her hip, her smile wide and oddly triumphant. Callista moved to the center of the yard, the chatter fading until only the creak of lawn chairs and the hum of the neighbor's mower filled the space. Jonah sat perched on her hip, dressed in a tiny button-down shirt and bow tie, blinking against the sunlight. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate Jonah's special day," she began, her voice carrying just enough to reach every corner of the yard. "This past year has been full of surprises and challenges." She paused, adjusting Jonah on her hip, her gaze sweeping the guests. "And I've been keeping a secret, one I can't hide any longer." A faint ripple of curiosity moved through the crowd. My mother lowered her eyes to her lap. My father's hands tightened on the table. "Jonah," Callista said, placing her hand lightly on the child's head, "is not Tyler's son. He's Aaron's." The words landed like a dropped glass, sharp, shattering, impossible to ignore. Conversations stopped completely. Someone gasped. My father's head jerked toward me. My mother's face went pale. Callista kept going, her tone practiced. Aaron wanted to make sure his son was provided for before he died. He updated his will. She reached into her purse, unfolding a single page with slow precision. According to this, half of Marin's $750,000 house is to be passed to Jonah. The will fluttered faintly in the breeze. Aaron's signature scrawled across the bottom. Around me, eyes shifted between Callista, the paper, and my face, searching for a reaction. I didn't give them what they were looking for. Instead, I felt the corner of my mouth tug upward, not a smile of amusement. Not exactly, but one that came when a situation was so absurd, so wildly untrue, that the only thing left to do was acknowledge the ridiculousness of it. "Oh," I said evenly, meeting Callista's gaze. "I see." Her eyes flickered, as if she'd been expecting anger, maybe outrage. I offered neither. The silence that followed stretched long and taut, the air thick with speculation. I set my untouched lemonade on the table, my fingers steady despite the pounding in my ears, because while Callista clearly thought she'd just detonated the biggest revelation of my life, she didn't know what I knew, and that was going to make all the difference. Callista's announcement might have rattled anyone else, but for me, it was almost surreal, like watching a poorly scripted play when you already know the ending. The truth had been cemented years ago, in moments she never knew I saw and details she couldn't possibly guess. It started at a summer barbecue at our parents' house. Aaron was at the grill, flipping burgers. When I noticed Callista leaning a little too close, her hand lingering on his arm as she laughed at something he'd said. It wasn't just casual affection. It had a charge to it, the kind of spark meant to test boundaries. I didn't confront her that day, but that night, as Aaron and I cleared dishes in our kitchen, He set down a plate and looked at me with that steady gaze of his. "I need to tell you something," he said. "While you were inside, Callista made a pass at me." He explained it plainly how she'd told him he was too good for just one woman, how she'd brushed her fingers over his hand in a way that was anything but sisterly. He'd shut it down immediately, telling her it was out of line. We agreed, right then, to keep our distance from her. Invitations with her name on them suddenly had conflicts. Family visits were timed so she wouldn't be alone with him. We didn't make a scene, but we kept our guard up. 2 years later, Aaron started complaining of an ache that wouldn't go away. Tests revealed a varicocele that needed surgery. During the consultation, his doctor recommended a vasectomy at the same time, less invasive than doing it separately and the surest way to prevent complications from recurring. It was a hard conversation. We'd spent years hoping for a child, enduring rounds of IVF that led nowhere. But by then, we'd accepted our life together as enough. For his health. We agreed. The surgery was done in early spring, 2 full years before Jonah was conceived. Only Aaron, his doctor, and I ever knew. It wasn't something we advertised, not to family, not to friends. After all the questions about our childless marriage, we had learned to protect our privacy. So when Callista stood in her backyard, declaring Jonah to be Aaron's son, I didn't feel the ground shift beneath me. I felt something closer to grim certainty because I already had the one fact that made her claim impossible. Aaron had always been the kind of man who balanced optimism with quiet readiness. He wasn't a pessimist, far from it, but he believed in having things in order, just in case. That side of him became sharper after Callista's first inappropriate comment and the awkward family dinners that followed. He started keeping notes. At first, I didn't realize what he was doing. But one evening, I found him at his desk, typing on his laptop with a stack of papers beside him. "Just making sure there's a record," he said when I asked. He didn't sound angry, just calm, as if documenting my sister's boundary crossing was as routine as paying a bill. When Callista sent a text that strayed too far from casual complimenting the way he looked when no one else was watching, Aaron printed it and tucked it into a file. If she lingered too long in conversation or brushed his arm in a way that wasn't accidental, he wrote down the date, the place, and exactly what was said. Around that time, he also met with James Halverson, an attorney he trusted implicitly. They updated his will to leave everything to me. No contingencies, no hidden clauses. He told James about Callista's behavior, even handed over a few printed messages, just in case anything ever came of it. When he came home that day, he mentioned it almost in passing, sliding his hands into his pockets like it was no big deal. Better to be prepared. Just in case. He said, I remember rolling my eyes, telling him he was overthinking it. But that wasn't all. A few months later, he asked me to go with him to the bank. We sat across from the branch manager as Aaron signed the papers for a safety deposit box. Inside, he placed an envelope containing the updated will, the file of printed messages, and a short letter to me explaining where everything was kept. He locked it with a quiet click, turned to me, and smiled. Now I can stop thinking about it. At the time, I thought it was an exercise in paranoia, a way for him to feel in control of something that wasn't even a real threat. I humored him, kissed him on the cheek, and forgot about it. Now, standing in the wake of Callista's public accusation, that forgotten lockbox felt less like a symbol of worry and more like a lifeline, and I knew exactly where I'd be going in the morning after the party. I woke before the sun, my mind still replaying Callista's words in the backyard. I didn't linger over coffee or breakfast. By 8, I was standing inside the cool, hushed lobby of our bank, the faint scent of polished wood and paper in the air. The branch manager, Mr. Keating, had known Aaron and me for years. His expression softened when I told him why I was there. Of course, Mrs. Calloway, he said quietly. leading me down the narrow hallway to the vault. The metal box was heavier than I remembered. I carried it to the small viewing room, the door clicking shut behind me, and set it on the table. My hands hesitated over the key for a moment, almost as if opening it would confirm that Aaron really wasn't coming back, that all I had left of him now fit inside a locked rectangle of steel. Inside was a neat stack of envelopes, each labeled in Aaron's handwriting. The first contained the real notarized will, no ambiguity, no contingencies, leaving everything to me. The next held his medical records, clearly stating the date and outcome of his vasectomy, 2 years before Jonah's birth. The language was clinical, detached, but to me it read like a shield. At the bottom lay a sealed envelope with my name on it. My fingers trembled as I opened it and unfolded the letter inside. Marin, if you're reading this, it means something happened I couldn't prevent. I hope it's years from now, but just in case. I wanted you to have what you'd need to protect yourself. I know how much you value family, how hard you try to believe the best in people. But not everyone who shares your blood has your best interests at heart. Don't let anyone take what we built together, not in life, and not after. I love you beyond words. Aaron. I read it twice, each line pressing deeper into me until I felt steadier than I had in weeks. Callista might have expected me to flinch, to fall apart under her accusations, but now I had Aaron's words, his planning, and his proof. It was time to make my next move. That afternoon, I sat across from James Halverson in his book-lined office. The real will and Callista's version spread out between us. James adjusted his glasses, scanning the forged document with a faint, humorless smile. This wouldn't last 5 minutes under scrutiny. He said, "The phrasing is wrong, the legal references are sloppy, and the signature? Well, I've seen Aaron's too many times to mistake it. This is a poor forgery." His certainty steadied me. Still, I knew Callista wouldn't back down just because James declared it fake. She'd need to see her lies dismantled piece by piece. James leaned back. "If you're willing, I suggest bringing in someone who can uncover her motive and maybe give us leverage to shut this down quietly." That's how I met Lyle Torres, a private investigator James trusted. He was a stocky man with a calm, unblinking gaze that made it clear he'd heard every excuse in the book. I gave him everything I knew: Callista's spotty job history, her relationship with Tyler, and the timeline of Jonah's birth. He listened without interrupting, jotting notes in a small leather-bound pad. 3 days later, Lyle called me back to James's office. He slid a folder across the desk, each page a nail in the coffin of Callista's story. Callista was drowning in debt, over $70,000 in credit cards and personal loans. She was 4 months behind on rent, facing eviction by the end of the month. Tyler had left shortly after Jonah was born, sending only the occasional child support payment, and even those were irregular. Then came the messages, screenshots between Callista and a friend named Justine. In them, Callista spelled out her plan. "The house is worth at least $750K if I play this right. I'll get my share. Dave's helping me with the will, found Aaron's signature online. Looks legit." The words were cold, calculated, and damning. Looking at them, I felt a flicker of something sharper than anger clarity. Now I didn't just have the truth. I had the full map of every move she'd made, and I was ready to decide exactly how to use it. I called Callista the next morning and asked her to come by in the afternoon to talk about the will. Her voice on the phone was almost smug, as if she believed I was ready to hand over what she wanted. When she arrived, I led her into the living room where 2 chairs faced each other across the coffee table. On it sat a glass of water, a neat folder, and a small audio recorder. "I'd like to record our conversation," I said. "That way we both have a clear record of what's said." She agreed without hesitation. I started by asking her to walk me through the timeline of her supposed affair with Aaron when it began, where they met, what was said. The more details she offered, the more tangled her answers became. She claimed they met at a downtown hotel but couldn't remember the room number, the days of the week, or even whether it was before or after Jonah was conceived. Once the contradictions piled high enough, I opened the folder and laid out 3 documents. First, I said, sliding the medical records toward her. Aaron had a vasectomy 2 years before Jonah was born. These are from his doctor. It was successful. That makes your story impossible. Her face paled. I placed the next document in front of her, the authentic. Notarized will. Prepared by James. This is Aaron's real will. It leaves everything to me. The one you presented is a forgery. And we can prove it. Finally. I set down Lyle's report, detailing her debts, eviction notice, Tyler's absence, and the messages she'd sent about forging the will. She stared at it, her shoulders sagging. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. Jonah's Tyler's. I made the whole thing up. I didn't know what else to do. I'm out of options. I clicked off the recorder, keeping my expression steady. Then we're going to talk about exactly what happens next. I told Callista she had 2 choices: face criminal charges for fraud and forgery, or accept terms that would protect Jonah while holding her accountable. No money from my house, no lump sum. Instead, I'd set up a trust fund for Jonah's medical and educational needs. In return, she'd publicly admit the truth, start therapy, and maintain steady employment if she failed on any point. The support would end. She hesitated, but desperation won out. We agreed her confession would happen at a family dinner that weekend. When the night came, the air at my dining table was tight with unspoken questions. My parents sat stiffly, waiting. Callista stared at her plate, then finally spoke. Jonah isn't Aaron's. He's Tyler's. I forged the will because I was broke and scared. Silence followed, broken only by my father's sharp inhale. My mother's eyes darted between us. Why didn't you just ask for help? She demanded. Because you always help me, Callista said, her voice cracking. You always fix everything. I thought you'd find a way to fix this. 2. The words hung in the air like an admission none of us had been ready to hear. I told them there would be no more bailouts, no pretending things were fine. Jonah would have what he needed, but trust between Callista and me would take time if it returned at all. My father nodded reluctantly. My mother looked down, as if seeing a truth she'd avoided for years. It wasn't resolution, but it was the line I needed to draw, and I intended to hold it. A year after that dinner, the trust fund I established for Jonah is doing exactly what it was meant to, covering his ongoing medical care and setting aside money for his education. Callista has honored our agreement. She's been in therapy for months, holds a steady job at a small accounting firm, and keeps our contact polite but limited. We speak mostly about Jonah, and that's enough. In that same year, I've built something of my own, the Aaron Calloway Foundation for Legal Education. It funds scholarships for students from disadvantaged backgrounds who want to study corporate law. It's the kind of work Aaron would have championed, a way to keep his influence alive in the world. I've learned more in 12 months than I had in the decade before, that boundaries are not walls. They are the framework that keeps love intact, that preparation is not paranoia, it's power, and that grief doesn't vanish. It learns to live beside the parts of you that are still growing. This morning, I stand in the garden, surrounded by daffodils Aaron planted the fall before he died. They sway in the breeze, a riot of yellow against the green, their return as steady as the turning of the seasons. I still miss him every day, but the ache no longer swallows me whole. I am different now, more cautious, more deliberate, and somehow stronger. Aaron may be gone, but the love he left behind still shields me, and I intend to keep building my own protection, for whatever comes next. The lights from the stage were hot against my skin, the polished wood of the podium gleaming under them. My name echoed through the hall. Rowena Mercer and polite applause rose from the audience as I stepped forward to receive my MBA diploma. I smiled for the camera, holding the folder just as the photographer instructed, but my eyes drifted to the right. The row reserved for my family sat in plain view, empty. It shouldn't have surprised me. Still, the sight struck something deep, a hollow thud inside my chest. I'd held on to a faint, foolish hope that maybe this time would be different. Maybe they'd set aside whatever excuse they'd conjured up and show up for me. But the empty seats told the truth just like they had at every other milestone, in their absence. Memories filled the gap. My 16th birthday, when Brielle got a weekend trip to New York for a once-in-a-lifetime dance workshop while I got a store-bought cake left on the kitchen counter. My high school graduation, when my parents arrived late because they had to drive Brielle to a photo shoot. The scholarship dinner I attended alone because it's just a formality and they didn't want to take the evening off work. Brielle was 3 years younger, their golden child. Every one of her whims became a project the whole family rallied behind. My dreams, on the other hand, were met with reminders to be practical, self-sufficient, and not expect handouts. Toughen up, Rowena, my father used to say, as if resilience were a coat you could pull on at will. The dean's handshake lingered just long enough to pull me back to the present. I walked off the stage to the applause of strangers, returning to my seat among the other graduates, the weight of my diploma heavy in my lap, around me. Classmates leaned into their cheering families, cameras flashing, flowers exchanged. I kept my hands folded and my face neutral, already rehearsing the answer I'd give later when someone asked, "Were your family here when the ceremony ended?" and I stepped out into the crisp spring air. My phone began to buzz. I was halfway down the steps outside Low Memorial Library, diploma still tucked under my arm. When my phone buzzed again, the number was unfamiliar, main area code. For a moment, I almost let it go to voicemail, but something about the timing made me swipe to answer. Ms. Mercer. The voice was deep, measured. "This is Elliot Brandt, attorney for the Lewis estate in Harbor Bay. I'm calling regarding your grandparents' affairs." My breath caught. My grandparents. I hadn't heard their names. Thomas and Evelyn Lewis spoken aloud in months, not since the quiet memorial service I'd organized mostly by myself. "Yes," he continued, "as their sole heir, you've inherited their property and investments. We'll need to meet soon to go over details, but I can tell you now the current estate value is approximately $1 million. I stopped moving. Around me, graduates laughed and posed for photos, but the words $1 million seemed to pull the sound out of the air. I wasn't thinking about the number so much as the fact that they had chosen me deliberately, unequivocally. Images came unbidden my grandfather in worn flannel, teaching me how to fix a loose fence post. My grandmother's hands dusted with flour as we rolled pie crust on the old kitchen counter. The two of them reading side by side on the porch. The ocean just beyond the rose garden, from high school through their final years. I'd been the one driving up on weekends mowing the lawn, replacing light bulbs, sorting their mail. They never asked for much, just company and help with small things they could no longer do. My parents and Brielle rarely came except for Thanksgiving photos, or a quick stop on the way to somewhere else. Ms. Mercer Elliott's voice brought me back. "If you can be in Harbor Bay this week, we'll begin transferring control to you." "Yes," I said. The word firm. "I'll come." We exchanged details, and I ended the call, tucking the phone back into my bag. The spring wind carried a faint chill, but it wasn't the cold that made me tighten my grip on my diploma. It was the sudden awareness that this gift came with a shadow. I knew my family well enough to understand what would happen once they found out, and I wasn't going to wait for that day to arrive unprepared. 2 days after the call from Elliot Brandt, I was seated in a glass-walled office in downtown Portland, across from Damon Clay, a trust attorney recommended by a former classmate. Damon was in his mid-40s, calm-eyed, the kind of man who spoke sparingly but left no doubt about his meaning. After listening to me outline my family's history, how borrowing in their vocabulary meant gone forever, and helping manage was just a step toward taking, he leaned back in his chair. "If you want to make this airtight," he said, "an irrevocable trust is your best option. Once it's set, no one, not even you, can pull the assets back into your personal name. They'll be beyond public reach, and you'll be the sole trustee." It sounded final, and maybe a little ruthless. But finality was what I needed. We spent the next 3 weeks in a blur of signatures, transfers, and sealed envelopes. Damon arranged for an LLC owned by the trust to take title to the Harbor Bay property, every utility account, every tax record, every insurance policy shifted under that entity's name. The investment accounts my grandparents left were closed. The funds moved into trust-managed holdings with dual authentication access. Only Damon and I controlled. The paper trail disappeared from Maine. Copies of the original documents went into a locked file at Damon's office and a safe deposit box in Boston. Far from anyone in my family, I didn't tell a soul, not even my closest friends. The fewer people who knew, the fewer loose threads for my family to tug at. One night, sitting alone in my apartment, I caught myself wondering if this made me cold, cutting them out so completely, preemptively. Without a word, it was a kind of severing that couldn't be undone. But then I remembered every time they'd watched me scramble to cover my own tuition, every missed milestone, every "you'll manage" tossed over their shoulders as they walked away, and I realized cold was exactly what had kept me alive in that house for years. By the time Elliot called to say the estate transfer was officially complete, the lock was already in place. Now, all I had to do was wait for them to discover it. It started subtly, almost as if they'd all agreed to the same script. A text from Brielle. "Saw you were in Harbor Bay last weekend. Thought I might stop by sometime. We should catch up." A call from my mother, her voice overly warm, asking how work was going and whether I'd had time to think about the future of the house. The first weekend I was back at the estate, my father appeared in the driveway with a toolbox, claiming he'd noticed the porch railing looked loose the last time he drove by. He offered to fix it up. No charge. I told him I had it handled. Brielle was more persistent. She'd drop by with a tin of cookies or a bundle of flowers, drifting through the rooms with that bright smile, asking questions that sounded casual but weren't. "Do you still keep the deed in the house?" "Just curious, I've never actually seen it." I'd change the subject every time. At dinner one evening in their kitchen, my mother set down a roast chicken and launched into a speech about keeping family property in the family, glancing at me as if I might spontaneously offer to split the inheritance. Brielle chimed in about how much she'd always loved the place, how she could see herself living there, maybe even renovating it. I smiled, nodded, and offered nothing. Each visit, each phone call, was a slow press against the edges of my boundaries, testing for weakness. They thought I was still the daughter who could be worn down with enough insistence, the sister who'd give in to keep the peace. But I made sure to answer every probing remark with a vague, agreeable hum, giving them the illusion that I hadn't fortified the ground they were so eager to claim. Their patience was just as calculated as mine. And I knew, eventually, one of us would decide it was time to make the next move. The morning air was sharp enough to sting my lungs as I swept a scatter of maple leaves off the porch. The ocean was restless that day, a low rumble under the steady cry of gulls. I'd just leaned the broom against the railing when a familiar black SUV turned into the drive, crunching over the gravel. Brielle stepped out first, hair perfectly tied back, her expression bright with the kind of confidence that usually meant she thought she'd already won. My parents followed my mother clutching a slim folder, my father moving with that slow, deliberate stride he used when he wanted to look in control. "Morning, Ro." Brielle called, striding toward me. "I just wanted to let you know. This house is in my name now." She said it in a single breath, like she couldn't wait to drop the news. "Mom and Dad think it's best if you move out this week. I already have a potential buyer. I didn't flinch. Really? My father stepped forward, pulling a sheaf of papers from the folder. Your grandparents' will had an error. Technically, the property should have been left to both you and your sister. We've worked with a lawyer to correct it, and we've transferred title to Brielle so it's easier to manage. He held the papers out to me, as if expecting I'd take them with gratitude. I glanced down, at first glance. They could have fooled someone who didn't know what to look for: a blue ink seal in the corner, signatures in looping script, but the seal design was wrong, the notary's stamp number incomplete, and the signatures shaky, inconsistent. Brielle smiled like a realtor about to close a deal. Don't worry, I'll handle everything. We can get movers here in a week. I let the moment stretch, watching the certainty in their eyes, storing every detail the date printed at the top, the name of the so-called notary, even the faint watermark that didn't match county records. I've heard you, I said finally, my voice even. Then I stepped back, letting them think they'd planted their flag. They left, looking satisfied. I stayed on the porch until the SUV disappeared, already knowing I wouldn't have to wait long for their next move. 2 days later, the crunch of tires on gravel came earlier than I expected. A white moving truck rolled up first, the black SUV trailing close behind. From the passenger seat, Brielle hopped out in a fitted tracksuit, phone in hand, eyes alight with anticipation. My parents followed my father with a fixed smile, my mother already gesturing toward the porch as if directing a stage play. Behind me, Mark Ellery, the county property official, stood in a neatly pressed navy suit, a leather folder tucked under one arm. We'd spoken the night before. He'd reviewed every document in the trust and agreed to meet here in person. Now he waited, silent and steady, while I folded my arms across my chest. The movers had barely made it to the walkway when they slowed, taking in the scene. My father tried to keep moving forward, papers in hand, but Mark stepped into view, opening his folder and withdrawing a document stamped with the county seal. Mr. and Mrs. Mercer. Ms. Brielle Mercer, he said, voice clear enough to carry to the truck. I'm here on behalf of the County Property Records Office. As of last April, this property was transferred into an irrevocable trust under the sole trusteeship of Ms. Rowena Mercer. Any transfer of ownership attempted after that date is legally void and may constitute fraud. Brielle blinked rapidly. Fraud. We corrected a mistake in the will. Mark didn't even glance at her. Our records show the paperwork you filed used an unlicensed notary and was processed through an out-of-state service flagged for fraudulent filings. This is your official warning. Any further attempt to claim this property without authorization will be referred for criminal investigation. The movers exchanged looks, then began backing toward their truck. My mother's lips pressed into a tight line. My father folded the papers slowly, as if buying time, before turning sharply toward the SUV. Brielle lingered a moment longer, her expression hardening. You'll regret this, she said under her breath. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. When their engines faded down the road, Mark handed me my copy of the notice, his eyes steady. They won't forget this. Neither would I. And I knew the quiet that followed wouldn't last. 3 mornings after the porch confrontation, I found a thick envelope wedged in my apartment mailbox. The return address belonged to a law firm in Portland I'd never heard of, but the name on the line beneath was instantly familiar: Sylvia Mercer. Inside was a 4-page letter, printed on heavy cream paper. The language was polished, but the demands were anything but subtle: $150,000 in cash as emotional compensation, joint ownership of the Harbor Bay property with Brielle, and a monthly stipend until further notice to ensure the family's long-term well-being. The letter accused me of causing irreparable harm to maternal and sibling bonds by keeping the estate entirely in my name. I read it twice, then set it aside and reached for my phone. If they wanted to take this into the legal arena, I'd meet them there. Selena Voss agreed to see me that afternoon. Her office was on the 15th floor of a downtown building, the walls lined with framed trust and estate case victories. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the letter, the forged documents, and the attempted takeover at the house. Her response was immediate. We send a cease and desist, direct, documented, and final. They have no claim not with that trust in place. And we find proof of who filed those forged papers. Within 48 hours, the letter was on its way to my mother's attorney and her home address. It cited the trust's legal protections, warned against further harassment, and made it clear that any future attempts would trigger civil and potentially criminal action. Selena's investigator didn't take long to find the trail. The forged transfer had been submitted through a property filing service flagged in multiple states for fraudulent activity. The name attached to the submission Brielle Mercer. The notary seal number didn't exist in the state registry. Seeing it in black and white left me with a cold, steady anger. The county official's warning on the porch had been generous. They could have walked away. Instead, they doubled down. I left Selena's office with the report tucked in my bag, wondering if maybe this would be enough to stop them. But deep down, I knew my family too well to believe it was over. The first sign came from an unexpected place, a text from my cousin Maris. "You need to hear this." She sent over an audio file, and my mother's voice filled my kitchen, low and deliberate. "I don't want to speak badly about her," Sylvia said, "but Rowena took advantage of Dad when he was weak. Everyone knows he wasn't thinking clearly when he signed those papers. Maris didn't stop there. Screenshots from a group chat followed. My mother spinning the same story to a circle of relatives, with Brielle chiming in about family fairness and hidden motives. A few cousins even piled on, speculating about me forging signatures, twisting the truth into something unrecognizable. I sent it all to Selena. She didn't hesitate. They're trying to turn this into a reputational war. "If you let this stick, every move you make will be seen through that lens. We fight back with facts publicly. For 2 days. We built a 12-page statement of facts. Every date and document lined up the trust's creation, the property transfer, the fraudulent filing trail with Brielle's name on it, and the county's records disproving every accusation. I sent it to every relative in that group chat and to anyone my mother had tried to sway. The subject line was simple, the full truth. Apologies began trickling in within hours. Some were brief, just a few words acknowledging they'd been wrong. Others came with long explanations about how convincing my mother had sounded. Not everyone changed their mind. A handful doubled down, accusing me of airing family business. But the momentum had shifted. The lies no longer stood unchallenged. By the end of the week, the silence from my mother's camp felt heavier than any reply. I knew they were regrouping. News of Brielle's new job came from a mutual acquaintance who thought it was great we were both doing well. A quick search confirmed it. She'd joined a luxury real estate firm known for touting ethics and client trust. I didn't waste time. Selena and I compiled the forged transfer documents, the invalid notary seal verification, and the county's fraud warning into a single indexed file. I sent it to the firm's ethics department with a short note. "This concerns your employee, Brielle Mercer, and her involvement in attempted property fraud." 3 days later, the firm terminated her. The case was forwarded to the state licensing board, which opened a formal review. That's when the counterattack came. Brielle hired a lawyer with a reputation for aggressive PR spin. He framed my actions as malicious interference in a young professional's career, feeding sympathetic quotes to a local business blog. Selena was ready. We sent the licensing board certified copies of every court-stamped document, including the cease and desist letter, the investigative report tying the fraudulent filing to Brielle, and the county's statement from the porch confrontation. The board acknowledged receipt, confirming the evidence would remain in the case record. The PR noise fizzled once the facts were on the table. I could almost hear the silence from their side, tight, calculated, waiting for the next angle. I knew it would come, and I knew I couldn't afford to look away when it did. 2 months later, a plain white envelope arrived, the return address from a Salem law firm. Inside, the letter was brief, all claims against me withdrawn, no further contact to be made except where legally necessary. I read it once, then folded it neatly and placed it in my file. No triumph, no gloating, just the quiet certainty that a chapter had closed. That weekend. I drove to Harbor Bay. The gravel road curved toward the house, maple leaves blazing in autumn colors, the sea stretching silver beyond. Inside, the air held the faint scent of aged wood and the lavender diffuser I'd left months ago. I walked through each room slowly, my hand brushing the red brick walls, the photographs, the worn armchair by the window. In the stillness, my grandfather's voice seemed to echo, "Protect what's worth keeping." I understood now he'd meant more than the property. It was my right to choose who could reach me, my ability to keep my dignity intact, my peace unbroken. On the porch, I looked out at the horizon until the light began to fade, knowing I would decide which doors stayed closed from here on.